It's a great honor, also a great pleasure to meet such distinguished people who always come together to discuss various issues, particularly concerning the emerging markets. And I must congratulate my good friend Mr. Harinder Kohli for doing it repeatedly, consistently, with a lot of efforts. And therefore, this is another edition of this Emerging Market Forum taking place in Paris. So, we're very happy to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think when Mr. Kohli and his colleagues must have conceived this idea of Emerging Markets Forum, there was always must be thinking that there are a lot of emerged world, and now we really need to deal with the emerging world. So the emerged world seems to be perfect. There was, really speaking, no problems. All the problems seems to be in the emerging world. And therefore, the idea could be that how do you use the best practices of the emerged world to be applied into emerging world? How do you make sure that emerging world will also emerge one day and will merge into this emerged world, the emerged world already, so that emerging and emerged will merge and will create a huge global market. That must be the good, laudable idea, which continues to be so, very relevant even today. But something very dramatic has happened in between. We always felt that world economy is going to only grow. It can only go in one direction. The matter was, the IMF, World Bank was very easy, whether it's 3% or 4%. And one could go wrong and then we could attribute reason, but of course it was going to grow for sure. And that was a understanding, perception, belief, confidence. Till 2000 it happened. And suddenly we started thinking, oh, there is a possibility that this growth, which has been unprecedented in the global economic history, which was witnessed till then, in that shortest possible time, there is possibly a question mark there. But then we thought probably, yes, this could be an aberration, but still growth will continue. This is just a temporary phase. And now, after almost 8 years, we still don't know where we are heading for. The biggest problem is not a slowdown. The slowdown is always happens. This is cyclical. It could be for various other fundamental reasons, structural reasons. But what is more worrying is that nobody knows what's happening. And that's the most fundamental problem of the global economy today. If you ask anybody what is happening, he said, that is the only thing I don't know. I can tell you something else. And therefore, this big challenge, the question marks before all of us is to understand what is happening and then to find a solution. The largest economy, which obviously tracks its growth on quarter to quarter, sometimes employment figures are good, but suddenly next quarter is something different. And therefore, even the Fed is finding it difficult to adjust the monetary policy to these so-called emerging changes in the emerged market. The second largest economy, which we thought is going to defy all logic and continue to grow indefinitely. I mean, this has been unprecedented growth since 1978. So double digit had come down, but still it's going to grow. Now forget the rest of the world. Those who run the market, run the economy of the second largest economy themselves are in doubt. And therefore the recent party congress again was wondering what's going to happen and what is happening. The third largest economy, unfortunately, despite these three arrows, it still is in trouble. And therefore, what is important is that we felt that emerging markets are always fraught with risk. So whenever any investment was to be made, you must add risk premium to that investment into those markets. And therefore, it was always preferred destination to make investment to emerging market. So there's no risk, nothing. What is the problem? Everything is known, institutions are strong, everything is predictable, and therefore we can know everything. Now, if one has to objectively look at it, I think the risk factor is more in the emerging market than the emerging market. Because emerging market risks are known. We know exactly what's going to happen. And therefore, it looks like the world is really changing so rapidly, so fast. And therefore, could we also now relook at emerging market itself to begin with? Because as we know, the G20, the largest economies of the world, 20 economies, account for more than 80-85% of the global output, global economy. And if we do not have some good, strong, predictable action, how can the rest of the world also ride the growth? And that's the problem. So the risk factor which emerging markets are facing today, I would feel are coming essentially from the emerging market. Because we see the globalized world in which the markets are integrated, wittingly, unwittingly. If there is something wrong in the strong emerged world, it is going to affect the whole world. As we are also experiencing in India, some of the strong headwinds of the global economy are also affecting our domestic economy. And at least there is a strong social security system. There are strong income levels already made in those world. But others who are actually suffering because of adverse effect of the global economic growth will be most vulnerable. And therefore, we really need to find out how do you actually address these issues. But that's the beginning. I'm not the expert to talk about 2050. And I'm sure, though I have not read the book, but knowing by reading all his previous contributions, it must be one of the great eye-opener leading us to the reality that is going to happen in the next 40 years or 35 years. So I would, rather than predicting what is going to happen, because the predictors have really not necessarily come to the right conclusion. But I'm sure that book will be talking. But there are, in my opinion, there are few issues in 2050 which will be very important to be confronted, and they are already being faced today, but will become worst confronted in the years to come. And one of that is, we have been always advocating the developing countries. I'm not now going into the emerging and emerged, but the developing countries have been arguing for a long time that if you have opened up the market, and we also believe in market-developed economy, market-oriented economies, for manufacturing, for the capital, there has been always a movement, and though nobody can stop, we already had movement for material, that finished good, everything. Why not we have movement for labor? If you really go by these three elements which constitute the economic activity, why not we go for movement of labor? And the argument always was, no, that's a completely different issue, because the sovereign states have a responsibility, we cannot do it, and therefore this cannot be dealt with. This is something which has to be left out. Now just imagine the worst sufferers of unplanned refugee influx is Europe. And why it is happening? It's not necessarily because of something else. It has happened because of a very unique situation wherein people cannot survive. There is almost a civil war in that part of the world. But the point is, if you don't allow a movement of people from one end to another, it's going to happen by perforce, by way of people moving because they will find a better opportunity. So the globalized world cannot just prevent people from going from one end to another. So one of the things that we really need to look at is how do you address the issue of mobility of professionals, people who seek better opportunities, and they'll be able to move into different parts of the world without affecting the national sovereign policy. That's understandable. But how do you do that is going to be a major issue. And therefore, one of the major problems we are facing today is arising out of this. But in my opinion, the big challenge that's going to come when the president of Ivory Coast was saying that what's going to be the population, we are going to already more than 7 billion. And if you are going to be 10 billion by then, I think that's what you must have predicted. I've not read it. I don't know how are we going to tackle this such a large population and without allowing them to be part of this process. So one of the challenge, in my opinion, going to be at that time, which already start happening now, is the immigration problem. People will like to move. You cannot prevent them. You cannot stop them. But the best way to do with this is to regulate it. How do you do that is something which we really need to look at. So that's a governance issue. So I'm sure you would have talked about global governance must emerge to deal with some of the big challenges we are going to face in year 2050. And you cannot deal with the 2050 problems in 2050. Those problems would have worse compounded if you don't deal with them now. You must start planning for it now. And therefore, one of the global institutional challenge, and that's the governance issue, is how do you deal with this? And in my opinion, the refugees and this mass migration might come from three sources. One is, of course, this war-like situation. I hope they will not be there over a period of time. But such will be one. That will be a trigger. The second, most important, will come, as I said, because of people want to take up jobs. If a doctor in particular part of the world has to go and work in the developed world, preventing him is something not going to work. So how do you make sure that we actually have harmonization of qualifications, experience, something like this, so that will allow people to migrate to work properly. The third trigger for this movement of people on a large scale will happen because there will be something like climate refugees. People will actually move from one end to another because they will not be able to survive on their part of the world. Because, and I'll come to that as a second major issue, but I'll just confine to this, is because these people will not be able to just find anything to survive, and therefore they will go. So I think this is something which we really need to look at. The second issue, in my opinion, after this migration, is something which 2050 will have to deal with, and we are already dealing with it, is the issue of climate change. And I'm glad that this forum is also taking place in Paris. Recently, COP had a very, in my opinion, you cannot get the best of any global negotiation. And probably it is better to have something rather than having nothing. And therefore, this was a good outcome, in my opinion. I was just meeting the former foreign minister of Paris, and I was telling him that he has succeeded in saving the planet, at least for the time being. What happens eventually is a different thing. But at least some action, wherein some concrete steps have been taken. But in my opinion, that's going to be a major, major issue. And if you do not deal with climate change as a global issue, I remember, and my good friend Dr. Monty Singh Alole has been also doing that for a long time, is we have been saying that national action is absolutely must. There is no question about it. There is no alternative about it. But just imagine just taking national action, disregarding the global implication, how it's going to work. And why? Because the global emissions, whether they are 350 ppm or whatever level, those global emissions have to be controlled. Because if you do not allow the global emissions to be controlled at particular level, that means the global temperature will rise beyond 2%, 3%, 2 degrees centigrade. And if that happens, this is not going to work because each country will get affected. Climate change is a unique phenomena in which whoever has caused it, let us not go into the political debate, but the reality is that almost everybody is suffering. And strangely, paradoxically, those who are suffering the most are the ones who have not caused it. So that's something very interesting. Country like India, which has hardly any global emissions, per capita level or even global emissions level is not substantial, considering the populations, considering the level of growth, is the worst sufferer of climate change. And therefore, you really must understand that global action on climate change immediately is something which will make this just and peaceful world that you are talking about by 2050. And that's the correct objective. You cannot just have a developed world. You must have just, equitable and peaceful world. And to make it peaceful, you cannot make it peaceful unless there is somebody else who is unhappy. I remember a great father of nation, Mahatma Gandhi, used to say that you can never sleep in peace if you know that your neighbor is hungry. And that is what is the reality. You cannot actually live a peaceful and prosperous life in just some part of the world, as now we are seeing in already by the event that have taken place recently, unless you address it. So global action on climate change as a priority will make by 2050 what we desire to do it. And that action has to begin right now. And that, as known, Dr. Nicholas Stern, a great economist, also Lord Lichtenstein now. He has been saying that action today could be less expensive than postponing the decision, which will be even beyond repair. And therefore, this is my second, I think, what to make that realization possible that should be taken. Third, maybe arising out of it, but I'm just saying this and posing this issue because Africa is luckily blessed with little more natural resources than many other continents. But not enough when the population will rise to that level. And as we are seeing, the stress, global stress that is going to increase is also as a result of the natural resource management issue globally. Water is going to be a big, big challenge of the world, if it has not already become. Some part of the world are already suffering, but some more will suffer, and I think only the increase will happen. So how do you deal with water? Is it a local problem? Yes, it is. But also it's a global problem, because this manifestation of a local problem to become a global problem is a matter of time. So if you want a just, equitable, peaceful world, we must address this problem as a global solution. And it is also possible. It includes many things, which of course, if the global community joins hand, it is possible. Because at least in most developing countries, the most of the water is used for agriculture. So agriculture is a sustainability issue, but also agriculture is a livelihood issue. If we not have agriculture, people will not get jobs. Now, you cannot do agriculture without water. So some part of the world who are blessed with more water, like Latin America, 26% of the global water, only 6% of the population, or North America, particularly Canada, with a lot of water. Could we think about a global ecosystem, global system whereby you could have a new cropping pattern? Because when you actually grow food or grow any agriculture product and you actually export it, you are actually exporting water. It's a virtual export of water. So could we think about a new governance, global ideas to come out with? And we have a FAO, but I don't know whether they are actually addressing the issues like this. But if you want a good, equitable world, which has to be there, we must deal with these issues in a very, very effective way. I think another major issue which is going to be, we are facing already, again, it's more relevant to talk about it in Paris, is the issue of terrorism. If you want peaceful world cannot exist with terrorism some part of the world. So unless you address that issue in a proper manner, and we need global cooperation for that, this issue cannot be dealt by individual country. Because we are seeing that ideology may originate somewhere else, the perpetrators may be different people, and actually the victims may be completely different. So it's again part of a global system. So therefore we really need to deal with some of these global issues of this kind, magnitude, as global challenges, and global community must actually join hands to deal with this. I'm deliberately not mentioning all those global issues which are dealing with anywhere at the global level, whether it's trade issues, whether issues of economy, there are institutions which are dealing with them. But some of the issues we really need for climate change. Of course, we have a global issue with UNFCCC, but not so much action. So I think we really need to look at some of the issues from governance perspective, some of the issues from the idea of how do you deal with them, and how to deal with them in a collaborative way, wherein there will be a win-win situation that can emerge. It cannot be the loser and the winner's game, so nothing will happen, as we saw in the climate change negotiation. So therefore, how do you develop this win-win partnership which can benefit each part of the world, and therefore we can benefit. So I think we really need to look at these issues as one of the strong global challenges which are going to come. And I am sure, knowing what Dr. Harinder Singh stands for, he must address these issues definitely. So I'm not writing a foreword for your book because already published, but I'm just saying this is something which is already are some of the challenges which are really to be faced. We really need to do that. And to do that, this global governance is one of the challenges of global governance is how do you deal with sovereignty issues. So I think we'll have to have some countries, all countries actually, looking at the new concept of sovereignty. We must look at how do you deal with these global challenges which are going to be affected to each one of us. How do you actually, if not surrender, but work on a sovereignty issue from a different perspective so that each one of us survive. I think the challenge is making us prosperous, peaceful, and equitable world is something which will be the next step. The challenge, if you don't address these issues, will be the issue of survival for us. So I'm sure we'll deal with this. I'm very happy. I was a little embarrassed to speak to all of you because I can know each one of you has so much of eminence in this field. But I'm sure when there is a global economic conference, I don't know whether it happens, but economists, so they also ask some of the early learners to come and participate in that.
बकरी हो काट दो मेरे को क्या करते आपका प्रोफेशन वही होगा ऐसा दिख रहा है कि आईसिस की आइडियोलॉजी इनकी हो गई अब